Okay, welcome everybody to the Thrills and Chills readings from Bookathon weekend. We are here with we have Bailey Bridgewater, Crin Claxton, Greg Herren, Cari Hunter, and myself. And we are talking about mystery today. We're reading about mystery. Some quick reminders for you. Set your screen to galley view so you can see all of us. The chat roll is live for your comments, but put your questions in the Q&A box, and we're going to try and get to them as many of them as we can. And most important, perhaps, there's a 20% sale that started at 11 a.m. So please go buy books after you hear from us all. We're going to start today with Bailey Bridgewater. Her pronouns are she and her. She travels around the U.S. and Canada hiking, playing with shelter dogs, and writing grants for nonprofits. Come Find Me in the Midnight Sun is her first published novel. Its sequel is due out in June. Bailey, the screen is yours.
So in Come Find Me in the Midnight Sun, we have new Alaska State Trooper Louisa Leinbach and her partner Mikey Harper, and they're investigating the case of a missing man in Alaska named Lee Stanton. So at this point in the novel, they're not finding a whole lot of clues, so they decide to go back to his home to investigate further. When we open the door, the smell is almost pleasant. It's some sort of air freshener meant to smell like clean sheets. I sniff around and find a Glade plug-in in the kitchen wall. The dishes are gone from the sink. Otherwise, the place looks untouched. Mrs. Stanton believes Lee will come home. I plant myself in the middle of the trailer and slowly rotate. Harper paces. Suddenly he stops and completes an about-face on his boot heel. There's no gun in here. No. Don't you think there would be? If he doesn't have it with him, living out here? Yeah, probably. I'd sure as hell keep one with me. You never know what you were going to encounter when you open that door. Right. So what kind of gun do you think he has with him? Hard to say. I'd guess shotgun if he's thinking run-ins with wildlife. But if he went to kill himself, I don't know, a handgun? He wouldn't exactly be worried about fighting off animals. They might save him the trouble. There were loads of extra bullets in the sheds outside for a bunch of different guns. Did you see any in here? We opened drawers and cabinets. I rifled through the nightstand. Nothing. He'd have extras, so we took them with him. Maybe. This isn't going anywhere. Why does it matter how many bullets he took? I resume my rotation. My eye catches the edge of the dog bowl in a cardboard box. I open the kitchen cabinets again. There it is. A bag of Purina dog food. What are you thinking? I just want to try something. I grab the bowl and the bag and carry them outside. I shake the bag vigorously and shove my fingers into the sides of my mouth to whistle. It's the one skill my dad bothered to teach me. Harper's startled and covers his ears. He gets it, though. Here, dog. He whistles, too, while he walks around the trailer. I shake the bag for a bit, then pour the food from a distance so it makes a loud clang as it hits the aluminum bowl. I hear Harper's voice as he dog speaks brightly. Hey there, buddy. You know that sound? It's all right. Come on. Harper's crouched with his hand extended when I round the corner of the trailer. Careful. We don't know if that's the dog or if it's friendly. I think this is our guy. Who else's dog would be around? As if to confirm the thought, the dog prances right up to Harper and licks his hand. He's big, maybe 80 pounds when he's not so scrawny. He's got the eyes of a boxer and the body of a shepherd with ears that flop up and down as he trots. He vigorously wags a nub where his tail should be. He's dirty, especially around the nose, as if he's been digging, but his hair is still clearly auburn and about the right length for what we spotted on Lee's clothes. The dog runs toward me when I shake the bowl and immediately dips his head to eat. I pet him while he devours the food, then refill the bowl. He downs that too, then looks at me expectantly. He barks once with his nose towards the sky, and he starts to walk away. No, stay, buddy. Harper starts towards the dog. I put out my palm to stop him. We should follow him and see where he goes. He might lead us to his owner. Harper's eyes grow large. Good call. Grab the collar and leash by the door. Harper opens the trailer door as I follow the dog to the tree line. The dog looks back at me periodically as he high steps through the fine snow. He's headed up the mountain at a zigzag. Harper's trotting after us. The dog canters a good 3/4 of a mile, splashes through an icy cold stream, and then looks at us from the other side. I've slowed to wait for Harper. The dog yowls, which I interpret as dog speak for hurry. We don't have our water gear, so we find a good crossing spot. I grab Harper as he starts to slip on the moss. For an Alaskan, he's surprisingly not outdoorsy. The foliage is denser on the other side of the stream. We've come around the mountain. At a massive boulder, the remnants of some landslide, surely, the dog stops, puts his wet nose to the ground, and sniffs with his mouth open. He trots around the boulder, then army crawls under a couple of downed trees. I drop to all fours and follow as I fumble in my pocket for my compact flashlight. Even with the sun out, it's dark here, and I can feel the moisture of the ferns beneath me seeping through my pants. The underbrush smells of leaf rot. Harper hesitates. The hole I've squeezed through is barely wide enough for me, and there's no use in both of us getting our uniforms filthy. I'll check it out and holler if I find anything. I'm not sure why I'm yelling. It's so quiet here. All right, I'll keep an eye out for what is unclear. I resume tracking the white patch of fur under the dog's truncated tail. He wiggles himself free of the down spruce, and soon after, I emerge into a clearing with streaks of sunlight filtering in through the branches. I get my bearings. There's a circle of pines around me, and within the circle, remnants of what must have been a riot of purple, white, and yellow wildflowers. They're wilted now, as are the tea berries that still exude a weak fragrance. The dog is across the circle now, several yards away. His head is raised, his back straight like a pointer. He stares at me, and his nub is gone still. He turns his head towards the trees behind him, then back at me. As I slowly approach, he barks, but he doesn't move away or show signs of aggression. When I get within a few yards, he moves to the trees and starts pawing the ground. The smell hits me, and my entire visage goes temporarily green. My throat and nose are acidic, and I gag. Salt from my eyes falls into my mouth, and I blink rapidly. When I can see again, a boot emerges from a soft clump of fern. The dog uses its nose to lift something, then drops it back to the dirt. A hand. I yell for Harper.
Wow, that was excellent. Thank you. Okay, I have a question, and I'll put this question to all the authors. What was the seed for this novel?
So for me, I was actually doing a writing residency in Lake Clark National Park, Alaska, which is about as rural as you get, involves a plane ride and then boat ride and then hike. And so it was the immersion in the setting of Alaska. This is not the book I intended to write when I went there, but I got there and I was just so awed by the scenery that I kind of started learning a little bit. I looked up missing persons Alaska and found these wild statistics on the number of people who disappear from there. And that was the impetus for writing the book.
That was cool. That's cool. I always wonder where it all begins for some writers. Okay, thanks. We're going to turn to Cari Hunter now. Cari lives in the Peak District in the UK with her wife and their 2 cats. She cooks a mean Bakewell tart, likes stomping up hills, and has lately added sheep wrangling to her list of talents. She works full-time as a paramedic and dreams up stories in her spare time. Cari has had 10 books published with Bold Strokes. Her latest release, A Calculated Risk, is the first in a new crime series based in Northern England. Cari, screen is yours.
Thank you. This is the very first scene from A Calculated Risk, so it's not going to need much of an introduction, I don't think. Anybody who's not fond of swearing, though, you might want to stick your fingers in your ears for the next 6 minutes or so. The siren gave a single warning whoop as a blue strobe highlighted the dents on the Michael's bodywork, and Detective Inspector Joe Shaw keyed her radio, waiting for a gap on the channel. "Can you run a reg for me?" she said. "Whiskey Alpha 111 Delta. I'm guessing the owner is called Wahid." "Wahid Kazi," their dispatcher confirmed. "Lives at 27 Cranmere Street, Newton Heath. No tax or insurance and multiple arrests for possession with intent." "Fancy that," Joe said. "Another upstanding citizen." Her partner, D.I. Matt Tully, was keeping their own car at a safe distance, and he winced as the micro ricocheted off a curb. "Is he steering with his bloody knees?" Tully asked. "Can we nick him for that, as well as possession of whatever he'd stuffed under his cap?" "Certainly." Joe began to shrug into her high-vis jacket. "Bet you a quid he does a runner," she said, and cackled when the micro's door swung open. "Every time," Tully slammed on the brakes. "Every fucking time you say that." He blasted the siren again, and the lad, already halfway out of the car, jumped and dislodged his cap on the bodywork. A cloud of white powder flew into his face, and he spluttered, trying to waft it away. Oops, Joe said. Tully swore beneath his breath. That was an accident. You're my witness if this goes tits up. If? That's very optimistic. She kicked her door open, launched herself from the seat, and dashed around the front of the car. Oi, stop, please, she yelled. The lad clearly wasn't for stopping. He leapfrogged the bollard and dodged down a side street, aiming for an industrial site. Take a right onto Nugent, she shouted into her comms. Oh, for fuck's sake, scratch that, he's going over a wall. Try Roundthorn. She heard the lad yelp seconds before he disappeared from view, and she took a running jump at the wall, using gaps in the bricks to scramble the rest of the way up. She was almost at the top when she spotted the glass shards glinting like shark's teeth in a crowning layer of concrete. Bollocks, she muttered. Below her, the lad was on the verge of entering a maze of scrap cars piled high and deep. Ripping a clear section of the concrete, she swung her left leg well above the glass, and then made an absolute mess of bringing her right one over. A keen edge glided along the seat of her jeans, parting the denim in a neat line and sending a draft swirling around her backside. Location, Tully, she said, and she dropped down and sprinted in the direction the lad had gone. Roundthorn, Tully said. You still with him? Yes and no. She slowed at the first junction to take out her torch. Its beam hit a gleam of fresh crimson. He's gone to ground in Raheem's breaker's yard. He's bleeding like a stuck pig. I'm afraid to ask, Tully said. I'll be with you in 3. A sudden clatter made her whip around. She jogged toward the sound, avoiding a smeary red handprint on the side of a flattened Fiesta. Come out, she whispered. The lad suddenly made a break for it, darting across the gap at the head of an aisle. She started after him, skidding around the corner. She'd always been swift on the track, but even running flat out, she wasn't gaining on him. Police, stop, she shouted, thinking she should give him fair warning as she grabbed hold of a hefty hubcap. He ignored her, so she launched it like a frisbee and sent it flying into the backs of his knees. Jolted forward by the impact, he cried out, tripped over his ludicrous trainers, and face-planted the ground. She gasped out a laugh as she stared at him. At the very most, she had expected to clatter the thing off a couple of wing mirrors and rattle him a bit. Curled into a fetal position, the lad was holding both hands to his bleeding nose and moaning quietly. She approached with caution anyway, her baton extended and held ready. As certain of her safety as she could be, she crouched by his side and offered him a tissue. Here, use this, you daft muppet. Are you Wahid Kazi? Yeah, and I'm going to do you for assault, he mumbled through a mouthful of blood. No, you're not. She took off her sweater and pulled it tight around the laceration that was still pouring blood from his thigh. Not when I'm being nice and saving your life. His eyes widened, and he craned his neck to see what she was doing. Is it Bob, miss? Hard to say. Are you feeling woozy? Nah, not really. I'm well buzzing. She tilted the bill of his cap and caught the small, mostly empty baggie that slid off his shaved head. No wonder you were faster than a fucking whippet. He grinned, dribbling blood onto his chin, and she stood to wave as Tully approached them. Hey, miss, Wahid said. Hey, I can see your ass. What? She turned, patting her backside until her hand found the rent in her jeans. The material was flapping wide open and sodden with blood, and she traced the line of a deep slice through her right buttock. Great, she said, and Wahid laughed so hard his cap fell off.
Excellent. Thank you for that reading. So I'll put the same question to you. The seed for this novel was?
A desire, I think, to start a new series. Yeah, the seed was, this is the first in a new series, so maybe it might be 3 books like the Dark Peak series, I'm hoping. So the kind of, there is a relationship. Joe sort of meets up with a Dr. Isla, a woman that she's not seen for 15 years, and she was her first and only real love. So there's that kind of relationship bubbling along in the background, which has been quite nice to play around with. But yeah, I've done 3 standalones, I think, since the Dark Peak series. And I just felt it was time. I wanted to get back into sort of like proper police procedural, develop a case, develop a relationship, and not say goodbye to my characters basically after the after one book, because I think I've been told before that I have attachment issues. So I was basically, I like being able to stick around with them for a little bit longer than one book. So So that was nice. And Joe, who's actually the lead in this, had a cameo in Unbreakable. So everything went kind of backwards because I started a calculated risk first, and then put it on hold, wrote Unbreakable. So Joe ended up in Unbreakable in sort of like the later chapters. So that gave me the impetus to sort of play with her voice again. And then after I'd finished Unbreakable, I started, I picked up a calculated risk where I'd left it. So it all worked out.
Wow, excellent. Oh, all right, we'll wait for the next two. That's great. Thank you. Our third reader today is Crin Claxton. Crin is the author of the supernatural detective ghost mystery series and the vampire novel The Scarlet Thirst. Crin lives in London and is a production manager for theater. All yours, Crin.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to read from The Haunting of Oak Springs. Well, can't really see that, can you? And it's not mirroring. Anyway, that's what it's called, Haunting of Oak Springs. It's the third in the supernatural detective series, which is based around Toni Carson, who is a medium, so she can speak to ghosts. So she speaks to ghosts and helps solve their problems. I'm reading from the very first scene, so it will sort of set the atmosphere for you, hopefully. A rickety gate, strung with rusting barbed wire, swung in the wind. It crashed against the gatepost and blew open again, revealing a rutted, muddy track. The wind was bitter, and Toni Carson wasn't dressed for it. 4 short hours ago, London had been alive with the heat of late summer. In Derbyshire, the land was firmly in autumn. The track ahead threaded through a wild copse. It was impossible to see what lay beyond untamed branches of oak and elm. Toni turned to the ghost at her side. "Are you sure this is the place?" Bryony nodded towards a flat piece of wood nailed to a tree. Toni squinted at it. "No trespassers?" she asked. "Not there. There." Bryony stabbed a finger at a crumbling sign stuck on a rotting post to the left of the tree. Faded lettering spelled out the words, Oak Springs Farm. Bryony didn't seem happy to be home and looked as nervous as when she'd appeared to Toni asking for help. She passed clean through the gate, barbed wire and all, and started walking along the sodden track. Toni gingerly pushed the gate open. The path was dark ahead, shrouded by thick black cloud. The light was fading fast. Toni passed another sign nailed to a tree. No hawkers, no cold callers. Bryony waited ahead at a bend in the track, staring into the woods. Toni followed her gaze to yet another sign. Danger, keep out. "What's the danger?" Toni asked. "Later," Bryony said. Toni opened her mouth to press Bryony further when a click at her back froze the words in her throat. She spun around to stare down the barrel of a shotgun. The butch holding the weapon stood nearly 6 feet tall and stocky with it. Their eyes were masked by the peak of a grey tweed cap. They had a weathered, rugged face with a dark brown complexion, and when they spoke, their words were gravelly and succinct. "What do you want, boy?" Toni swallowed. The older butch was damned cool and twice as scary. "I'm not a boy. I'm a lesbian." The older butch straightened and appeared to consider Toni's words. "Well, lesbian, you're trespassing." They crooked an arm, still pointing the shotgun, and leaned on a sign hammered into the ground. The sign read, "If you're close enough to read this, get off my land." Bryony crossed the few feet between them, smiling affectionately at the person holding the shotgun. She patted their arm lightly, and the butcher's shoulders relaxed. "This is Red," Bryony said. Toni cleared her throat. "I've come to see Chris." Red pushed their cap back, meeting the driving rain with flint-cold eyes. They considered Toni for a moment and then waved the shotgun toward the track. "Let's go then. You first." As they started up a long track pitted with potholes, the wind picked up and the rain came down in sheets. Bryony disappeared. There were barren fields on either side. In their depths, Tony made out the occasional tree and dark shapes huddled together. Over the squelch of boots in mud, Tony caught an occasional murmur. Tony began to shiver, and not just from the biting cold. She'd taken Bryony's case on a whim. Leaving without telling anyone where she was going had seemed adventurous a few short hours ago. Now it felt bloody stupid. She was alone on a deserted path with a shotgun at her back. And there was something out there in the fields. People disappeared in situations like this. Cut into pieces and fed to the pigs disappeared. A two-storey farmhouse loomed ahead, squat to the ground, its grey stonework and dark slate roof blended into the stormy sky. Smoke puffed upwards from the chimney. A light flickered behind a window on the ground floor. Tony stopped at a low front door. "What are you waiting for? Christmas?" Red grunted. Tony pushed the door open, stumbled over a pile of boots, and fell over. "Wipe your feet," Red said. They passed through a rundown kitchen into an equally tired sitting room. A woman sat in a threadbare armchair, pushed close to the fire. "I've just made a brew if you want one, Red," she said without lifting her eyes from the flames. Tony guessed this was Bryony's spouse, Chris. She was white, with shaggy grey hair, and carried some weight on a muscular frame. Her skin looked like it had been knocked up and down the hill, rained on, sun-dried, and wind-battered. "Found someone poking around down by the copse," Red said. "Said they'd come to see you, Chris." Chris turned without getting up. She scrutinised Tony in a silence broken only by the loud tick-tock of a heavy mantel clock. "What do you want?" Tony balked before the glare of her. This was crazy. She'd been foolish to turn up at nightfall in a strange place. "I've made a mistake." "Spit it out," Chris said, and Tony saw the grief then in her red-rimmed eyes. There was a photo of Bryony in a frame on the mantelpiece with a dying red rose beside it. Candles flickered on either side of the frame. "I'm intruding," Tony said. Bryony materialised. "Tell them a cover story." "Selina Moonspirit's my aunt," Tony said in a rush. Chris blinked. "You know Lena?" "Hang on," Red muttered. "What do you mean, Lena's your aunt?" Bryony tutted. "Lena doesn't have any siblings." "Well, not my actual aunt," Tony embellished. "She was a friend of my parents, and I called her Auntie Lena." "How is Selina?" Chris asked. "Oh, fine. You know, busy." "Go on," Red prompted her. "Auntie Lena told me about this place, how she lived here with you, all of you." Tony looked around, trying to conjure the house full of lesbians from years past Bryony had described. "That's why I came." Red laughed, cocked the shotgun, leaned against a second equally faded armchair, and laughed some more. "Welcome to women's land, child. You're only 30 years late." That's where I'm going to stop.
Not only was that a moment of funny, but I got chills through that reading. This is part of the reason I don't frequently read stuff like this, but it was really good. Thank you. So where did you come up with the idea for this?
I wanted to. Tony lives in London, and I wanted to write another one. This is the third in this series, and I wanted to write a book that wasn't set in London. Wanted to move Tony out of her sort of hometown. And my sister happens to have a farm in Derbyshire, so it gave me the opportunity to go and get lots of, so I've been there, so I knew the environment and could sort of immerse myself in the environment. And the other reason for writing this book is much more solidly a mystery. It's Tony in the first book, Supernatural Detective of the series. Tony discovers that she's a medium and can see ghosts and communicate with ghosts, but she's not a detective, and she's thrown into it, so she's sort of a haphazard detective. But by the third one, it's much more solidly a mystery, this one. So yeah, that's why.
Excellent. Excellent. Good book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next author is Greg Herren. I have to admit that Greg sent me his bio this morning. Up until then, I had gone into the website to look it up. Y'all have to go to the website and read his bio because it's incredible. The man has written everything, won everything, and so he sends me this bio. Greg Herren is the award-winning author of over 40 novels and 50 short stories. His most recent release, Mississippi River Mischief, was released in November. He lives in New Orleans with his partner. Very brief, considering everything you've done. Wow. So, screen is yours.
All right. I'll be reading from Mississippi River Mischief, which is the 9th book in my Scotty Bradley series, which debuted originally in 2003. So the series will be turning 21 in April of this year, which is really kind of scary to think about. I'm just going to read from the opening because I was looking for something to read and I realized I would have to do so much setup for anything further back in the book that it would take the entire reading time to get through. So I'm just going to read from the opening, which is usually a fun place to start. And it also gives you some insight into what it's like to live in New Orleans. So here we go from Mississippi River Mischief, Chapter 1. I think we should turn it into a home gym, I said into the gloom. I mean, wouldn't it be great to just have to go downstairs to work out? And we can put in a sauna and a steam room. What do you think, guys? It was the Monday after Mother's Day and the termites were swarming. That was why we were sitting around in the living room in the dark. The only illumination in the entire building came from 2 blasphemy candles flickering in the corner of the coffee table. Modeled after Catholic prayer candles, one had a picture of Drew Brees in his Saints jersey with a halo and heavenly light shining on his head with the words, "Pray to Breezus" around the base. The other was St. Chris Owens of Bourbon Street. So yeah, blasphemy candles. They're very popular here. Yet even the scant pale light from the teardrop shaped flames was enough to draw an occasional scout termite from the gloom. We wouldn't see it until it landed on the glass slip of one of the candles before dive bombing into the flame. There would be a brief sizzling sound, and the yellow flame flickered and turned briefly reddish as the termite immolated. Once it was consumed, the flame would be solid and yellow again. The swarming rarely lasted more than an hour, but that hour always seemed to last an eternity. Termites have always been the bane of New Orleans' existence. The domestic kind were bad enough. Houses and buildings were tented to get rid of infestations, the bright yellow and red stripes announcing to the world that a termite Armageddon was happening inside. The city's original termite problem had grown exponentially worse since the particularly vicious Formosan variety had hitched a ride on a freighter to the fertile feeding grounds of our old, mostly wooden city after World War II. The dampness of our climate must have made them feel like they'd arrived at termite Disney World. Little fuckers love wet wood, so the entire city was an all-you-can-eat buffet. They killed live oaks that had survived hurricanes, destroyed historic homes, and I'd heard they could even chew through brick and mortar. Maybe that was an urban legend, but it wasn't one I was interested in proving. And Formosan termites swarmed. The first rule of surviving Formosan termite season was speed. Every source of light had to be turned off the moment you spotted the first scout. They're drawn to the light like moths, but unlike moths, they're drawn to the light in the hundreds of thousands, turning your home into a scene from Cecil B. DeMille's ultimate cheese fest, The 10 Commandments. The big street lamps along Decatur Street outside drew the swarms, horrifying clouds of little monsters flying around frantically trying to mate while shedding wings like revoltingly nasty snowflakes. Every year they returned after Mother's Day like the swallows to Capistrano, and every year on Mother's Day morning, I latched the shutters shut on the balcony windows and drew the heavier interior curtains closed. That helped reduce the swarming incidents inside the house some. Unfortunately, the nasty little vermin evolved a sixth sense that worked like a homing beacon, drawing them to any ray of light inside. And once the scout found it, he sent out word to the rest of the swarm. Within seconds, the apartment would be filled with them, triggering nightmares for months. I only made the mistake of leaving on the lights once during swarming season. I'd forgotten once on my way out, coming home to piles of termite wings everywhere with their wingless little corpses scattered throughout the piles. I was still finding wing debris months later. But I'd learned a valuable lesson, one I'd never forget and would never repeat. As awful as they were, there were no defeating the Formosan termites. You just had to adapt to living with them for the few weeks of swarming season while safeguarding your property as much as possible. The swarms had been much worse before Hurricane Katrina, but not even Katrina's destructive winds and the flood caused by the levee failures could get rid of them once and for all. I'd always hated them, but now that I'd bought the building on Decatur Street, termite season had become much more personal. I'd heard too many horror stories over the years about the damage termites inflicted. I hate termite season, Taylor said, like he'd read my mind. I loved having him around. I'll never understand how parents can turn their backs on their children for being queer, let alone one as amazing as Taylor. Smart, kind, and polite, he'd handled himself well even after what happened to him back during December. He seemed to be doing okay, so I tried not to hover and worry about him. Easier said than done. I'll probably never stop worrying about him. They are pretty nasty, Frank said, reaching in the gloom for the joint I'd just slit. You freaked out that first time you experienced a swarm. I blew out smoke and placed it in his fingers. I'd fallen asleep that first spring Frank had lived here and forgot about the termites. I woke up to a crash and lots of swearing from the living room. I'd yelled for him to turn out the lights before rolling over and going back to sleep. He'd itched for days. We haven't been swarmed since. He took a hit and passed the joint over to Taylor. Hard to believe that was almost 15 years ago, I replied, watching the cherry grow bright red as Taylor inhaled. Frank had changed a lot in those 15 years. Someone would have told him 16 years ago that he'd be living in New Orleans one day and sharing a joint with his nephew. He would have called for the men in white coats. It hadn't been easy for him, shaking off 20 years of experience and training as an FBI agent, but he'd eventually adapted. Always the strong, silent type, he'd never been overly comfortable expressing any feelings or emotions other than anger. He'd been raised with such a narrow view of what being a man meant, and 20 years as a Fed hadn't helped. Toxic masculinity hurts everyone. I still couldn't believe we'd been together for over 15 years. We'd both changed so much since that Southern decadence when we first met. The world has changed so much since then. And I'm going to call that the end. All right.
It was great. I love being reminded of Fire Island. So same question to you. What was the genesis of this book?
Well, usually I come up with Scotty, I have to come up with the Scotty series. I generally come up with a couple of things that I'm interested in writing about and then try to figure out a way to incorporate them all into the story. And once I figure that out, I can write the book. With this, it was originally, the first thread of this book came from a local scandal, not a New Orleans politician, but somebody in the New Orleans, southeastern Louisiana, family values politician, as they always are. Turned out he was interested in some teenage boys and who worked at the mall in Metairie and was buying one of them gifts, asking him to model bathing suits and underwear and send him pictures and stuff like that. And the kid didn't think anything of it. And his friend called the newspapers. One of his friends called the newspapers. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting story. I want to write about that. And then I remembered there was something that I'd brought up in an earlier Scotty book, the second one, in fact, that I'd always meant to circle back around to, something from Scotty's past. And it kind of fit with this. And then there was a third thing, which was when I was growing up, rural counties, rural parishes in our case, generally were very, very much dictatorships run by a particular family, a very corrupt family who controlled the police, who controlled the district attorney, and who did all of that. And I wanted to address that in a book. And then I thought, but is that still true? Does that still happen? And then the Murtaughs, a South Carolina story, broke and said, oh yes, that's still very much a true reality of Southern rural life. And so I decided to tie it all up together. And then as I was writing all of these about writing this about a fictional rural parish in South Louisiana, I also wanted to, I do this periodically, I do shout outs to things that I've read and enjoyed. And in this case, it was a Nancy Drew book in which Nancy Drew came to Louisiana, and it was The Haunted Showboat.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of paid homage to that and made the family name the same name of the family that Nancy was visiting, solving the mystery for, and the estate is has the same name, and there's a wrecked old showboat out in the swamp behind the house, just like in The Haunted Showboat. So that was a lot of fun. I like to have fun with Scotty's. Scotty's not as hard to write as other things I write because he's fun. And the fun thing about the Scotty books is no matter how insane the stuff that happens in the book is, it actually doesn't seem insane to people who live in New Orleans and Louisiana, because the reality is actually much more insane. So that's where the story came from.
Excellent. Thank you for letting us know, for sharing. All righty. That leaves me. Okay, I'll be reading from, there we go, Cold Case Heat. It came out in September. And okay, my bio. I live in New York with my wife of 20 plus years. Cold Case Heat is a murder mystery based on an event in my life. And it's my third novel with Bold Strokes Books. I do hope my books transport you to places you've never been, even if they're lands of emotional reality you didn't count on visiting. These are the kinds of trips that I like best as a reader. So this is from a bit later in the book. But let me set out the book for you. When Sid Hansen receives a threat 40 years after her best friend, Wyatt Reed, is murdered, she goes to the NYPD. Seasoned veteran detective Gail Sterling and her partner Tommy D'Angelo take the case. Sid wants to be as involved as she can be in bringing the killer to justice this time. And it turns out Gail needs her perspective. As they work together, an attraction sparks, but their professionalism holds it at bay for a very long time until it can't. And then they have to look at what went wrong and how to make it right. As they talk, sitting in the park where so many of their meetings have taken place, life and the case intervene. Sid and Gail watch the rays of the setting sun struggle against the impending rain. I wanted to straighten this out before we arrest Dwayne Valchek at the airport tomorrow. I'm an exacting boss in all respects, Gail said. So for me to break department policy by sleeping with you during an ongoing case, you should have said something. Gail caressed her face. That was a 4-alarm fire Saturday night, and I didn't want to stop it. A few fat spatters of rain hit the sidewalk. They looked up at the darkening sky. I really have driven you crazy during this investigation, Sid said. In so many ways. I had to, for Wyatt's sake. I know, but you can't be at the airport with us. I won't risk it, Sid. He could be like a cornered rat, and now that you and I have arrived here, I don't want to lose you for any reason. Sid put a finger to Gail's lips. No more arguing. Let's talk about last Sunday morning. Gail kissed her finger. You know the two of us are still going to argue over everything, even when this case is over. The spatters became a sprinkle. Gail took off her coat to shield Sid. Let's get to the car. The rain changed to drumming drops, and suddenly it was like nightfall. They ran, ducking inside the front seat seconds before the cloudburst came down in sheets. The windows fogged up. Gail cracked hers, and the crisp air dissipated the vapor. In the violence of the downpour, rain shimmered on the pavement. Sid shook out her damp hair. I'm only argumentative when there's a reason, Detective Sterling. But you have won this last battle and therefore the war. I'm trusting your instinct that Dwayne Valchek holds the key to everything is correct. He disappeared for 40 years, and he disappeared for 40 years, and he stayed disappeared while collecting a major payoff from Ned Rossiter. At the very least, he knows things. I'm sure you're right. Now, Sunday morning, I wish you'd told me in your text what was going on, that it was department policy coming between us. You left me in the dark. Sid combed her fingers through her hair. You know, I'd always meant for Saturday night to happen in my apartment because I was afraid of how things could go for us if you had a reaction to my being in the bed you shared with Kate. Did you now? You planned to sleep with me. I'd love to know how long ago that was. Sid blushed. Gail took her hand. It was always going to hit me the first time, wherever it happened. But I'm glad it happened where it did, and with you, because I missed you after you left. That's what scared me. All I knew was that I wanted you back in my bed and in my life, and I was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. So I hid behind that text. You deserved better than that. But I'll also point out that you left well before I was awake. Sid had hoped Gail wouldn't bring that up, but what was good for the goose? She wasn't sure how she was going to explain her abrupt departure. The downpour was over as quickly as it began. Gail rolled the windows down. Everything smelled of wet pavement in spring. You ran away from me, Sydney Hanson. I think. She pulled Sid across the console between the seats for a kiss. We need to find out what made you run. Sid couldn't form a coherent word as she looked into Gail's eyes, the gold flecks against the hazel as splendid as the rain had been on the street. Come on, it's turning into a beautiful night, Gail said. Let's take a walk. She put the windows up and got out of the car. Sid was off the hook. She let out a sigh. Zipping her jacket up, she glanced at her side mirror. There was a tall man coming up the sidewalk by the park stone wall. He had that same familiar loping gait as the man she'd seen the night she and Gail sat outside Greg Oakley's apartment in her car after they'd interviewed him, finding out he'd been the last person to see Wyatt alive the night of his murder. His face was hidden by the same kind of hoodie. And then it came to her. That height and the way he dropped his shoulders and swung his arms. She was about to get out and greet him, but Gail was there opening the door for her. Gail, it's Billy. Before she could finish the sentence, what felt like a fire-tipped arrow ripped across the top of her right shoulder. The windshield shattered and she heard the gun report. She tried to cover her eyes against the flying shards of glass, but her arm was limp and the pain buzzed loud in her ears. She gripped the top of the car door with her left hand, struggling to get out as 2 more shots sounded and Gail fell, gun in hand. She didn't move. Sid slid down to the ground. All she could think about was protecting Gail, and she forced herself on top of her, covering her as best she could. Another gunshot rang out. Sid braced for death, even as she prayed for God to spare Gail. She didn't feel anything. Where was the light everyone talked about? An unmistakable voice called in a frantic "Officer down" dispatch. Then Tommy D'Angelo, her partner, was in her ear. Sid, can you hear me? Can you move? How was Tommy here so quickly? She couldn't move and she couldn't reply. Sirens sounded in the distance. I'm not dead. Sid, I'm going to roll you onto the sidewalk. It's going to hurt like hell, but I need to see Gail's injury. The pain as he gently moved her told her she was very much alive. So did the murmur of people's voices. The last 2 things she thought before blackness overtook her were, are Gail and Billy dead? And that is it. I think everyone else can come back in and we can have some questions, or we don't actually have any questions in the Q&A box. Is there anybody out there who has any questions? And if not, I'm going to keep my eye on the box. I was actually going to start with Greg if he's here. Oh, Greg. Okay. Oh, you talked about fun in doing putting stuff together. So actually, there's a lot of planning that goes into writing a mystery, which I found out when I wrote one. I'd never written one before. I'm not sure I'm going to write one again, but there was no fun for me. It was a lot of work. I mean, there's fun with the little things that you pull in, but good Lord, fun. How do you go about doing it? How do you go about the planning? Let's talk about that for a few minutes. We have 5 minutes left, I think.
The Scotty books are more fun for me to write because I like the character so much. I like being in his head and his reactions to things. That's, as far as the drudgery of the actual writing isn't fun. That's never actually fun. But I like coming up with figuring it all out. And I try to do Scotty I write Scotty books in a very, very different way, in that he's just one of those people that things happen to. You know, he's always stumbling over bodies, and he's actually a licensed private eye, but I don't think he's ever been hired. This book is the first time he's ever actually been hired, and it's number 9. So I just kind of write it as it comes to me. And then I never have a plan. I know how it's going to end and I know what the setup of the story is, but I don't know any of the middle stuff, and I just let it go. And then I have to go back afterwards and find what I forgot to finish, or what needs to come out, or what needs to be changed. I usually figure it all out with the second draft, and the first draft is just trying to get there. I find that a lot more fun than sticking to an actual outline. I don't really outline other books as much as I used to, but Scotty's also very easy for me to write. It just comes to me, and it's other things I have to work on a lot harder than I have to work on Scotty. And that's why I think I say it's more fun and I enjoy writing Scotty more, is because it seems more freeform. It's not as stressful. I don't ever get, the deadline might stress me out a little bit, but I don't get stressed out about the actual writing and whether the plot's going to work or anything like that. I don't have anything more to say that.
Bailey, how do you come up with the twist in your?
Ooh, I actually am very careful not to come up with the twist. I feel like if I go into writing a book knowing what the twist is going to be, it's going to feel too planned and not natural. So I actually kind of let the twist find me as I write. I'm not an outliner. I write just kind of, it comes out as it comes out. And so I find that as I write, the twist is going to come in there somewhere. So I just kind of trust that that's going to happen, and I try not to overly plot a twist.
Okay, that makes sense. Cari, do you always know who done it at the beginning of the book?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've ever changed my mind either. Sort of like,
Okay.
I mean, I am a bit of a pantser. I've just seen a question in the Q&A, plotter or pantser. I think you've got to be a bit of both, or I am a bit of both. You need to kind of know where you're going, but the rest of it in the middle, I kind of make it up as I am going along.
Okay.
But I've never, yeah, I always know who's done it, and I usually know my big beats. So the big actiony bits. If there's a twist, I can't come up with that at the last minute. You can't. I think I have to know sort of like, because then you're putting the seeds in as you're writing along. So
Yeah.
if you don't know who done it, if you don't know who the twist is, then you've not been able to sow those seeds through the actual text. So, I mean, you know, if you go back through some of my books, you can actually see, you know, the answers are there staring you in the face. They're just not obvious. I think, hopefully, that, you know, it doesn't come out of the blue sort of thing. It's always supported by what's happened in the actual book. So, in terms of planning, I'm not great at it, but I will have certain things that I do plan that I know and that rarely change. And a twist, if there is one, like I say, I don't feel obliged. I'm not writing Girl on the Train or whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, I hated Gone Girl. That's one of the worst books I ever read was Gone Girl. I just cannot stand that twist for the sake of having a twist. Bollocks. I'd rather just write a decent story with a decent plot and not have to have this, oh my God, it's the shocking thrill, the shocking twist that nobody saw coming. You know, it's all over Amazon at the moment, that kind of crap. Just
That's
can't be doing.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah, there are some things I know what they're gonna be in there, and they don't change as I go along. They usually are set in stone pretty much.
All right. Excellent. Crin, heroes or villains, which are better to write? Which are more fun for you to write?
Both. I love a good villain. I always have to have a motive for the antagonist, you know, there's a reason why they behave the way they behave. That's probably me. You know, I don't want to believe in a world where just people are just horrible and evil. There's something that's created them, made them be that way, or they've got some kind of sympathetic reason. Even if you would never behave that way yourself, you can kind of, I hope that people can think, that's why. But it might not be obvious. You know, that usually unfolds through the book for the antagonist. But also with the series like the Supernatural Detective, I get very close, particularly to the lead characters. I'm very close with Tony and her best friend Jade, because they sort of go through. I put them through, take them to hell and back, basically, and they have to just roll with it. So we've all got close in the writing of it.
Yeah, I do find that happens. You really, get close to some of your characters. Okay, we have another one. Heroes because you tend to be in their head for the duration of the book. Yep, that's true. Okay. But yeah, the villains, I found it really difficult to get inside. Well, not get inside. I knew who the killer was, but to make them a three-dimensional person that people could really tap into as well. I mean, you can't make them just that one-dimensional evil person. You have to give your villain a reason, your murderer a reason, even if it's the most heinous person on the face of the earth. So, does everyone have their books there? Do you want to hold them up to your camera so we can see the covers?
I have to unmirror. Hang on.
Okay, that's excellent. All righty, good.
Mine's backwards, but anyway, it's the haunting.
No, it's actually it's
Oh, yours
frontward.
is right.
Yeah.
Mine was backwards.
I live
Um,
nomadically, so I don't travel with books.
Okay.
Too much
All
weight.
right. That's okay. We'll find it. And what is everybody working on next? Carrie, what's your next?
I'm writing the sequel to A Calculated Risk. I'm about 40,000-ish words into it, which is pretty good going for me because I'm not the most prolific of authors. So yeah, it would be continuing the adventures of
Great.
Joe and Isla.
Great. Bailey?
I'm actually in the editing process for the sequel. It's called The Land of Death and Devil's Club. It'll be out in June.
Ooh, that sounds good. Crin?
Oh, I'm in the middle of so
Well, I
many.
meant writing the.
Oh.
Greg, go.
Oh,
Go,
you said no. Go ahead. Alphabetical. You go first.
Okay, I was just saying that I meant to start writing the fourth book in the supernatural detective series, but I've completely changed genre, and and I'm writing a fantasy book, very genderqueer. This book, and I'm 35,000 into that, which for me, if you look at when my books come out, is fast writing. So this book just popped up into my mind and demanded to be written rather. So I haven't got a title for it even yet, but watch this space.
I kind of like when that happens, when something merges right into your head and you don't have any choice. Greg, what's your next book?
I don't know. I have so many things in progress right now. I don't know what I'm going to finish first. I'm doing another short story collection, and I've got some novellas in progress, and I want to write another Scotty book, but I haven't started that yet. Right now, I'm just kind of trying to figure out what I'm going to do next because I have so much stuff that's unfinished, and that drives me crazy when I have so much stuff that's unfinished. But I do have an idea for a story I want to write that comes from something in my childhood that I want to write, set in the 1970s, that I've been playing with lately. It's called The Summer of Lost Boys, which I think will be a lot of fun to write because it'll be fun to go back to the 1970s and write about the world that no longer exists, but very alive in my mind.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got something in the works from the 1970s as well. Late 60s, early 70s. It'd take me a while to get there. But yeah, it is kind of fun going back there and looking at what you did as a child and what happened to you and what your outlook was. So alrighty, I think we are at the end of our time.